What would you do if the man you built your life around shattered it in front of your child, and days later returned begging on his knees? Not for love, but for silence. This is not just my story. It is a story of betrayal, of power, and of the strength it takes to rise when the world thinks you should fall. The sound of his voice that night will never leave me. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he let them fall, sharp and deliberate, like knives thrown in a circus act where I was the target. "I want a divorce," he said, and he didn't even look at me when he said it. He looked at our son. It was 8:37 p.m. on a Thursday in April 2023. The dinner dishes were still on the table, the smell of garlic and butter hanging in the air, the television humming faintly in the background. Our boy, only 11 years old, froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. His eyes darted between us like a spectator who had wandered into a war zone. My husband didn't soften his tone, didn't wait until our child was out of earshot. He delivered his verdict like it was just another business transaction, a deal closed in the boardroom. I felt the air leave my body. For a second I thought I might faint, but I forced myself upright, clutching the edge of the table. My son's fork clattered to the plate, the sound echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. I reached out, put my hand over his and whispered, "It's okay." But it wasn't. Nothing was okay. The truth is, this moment wasn't born overnight. It was the final act of a play that had been running for years. The cracks had started long before, hidden beneath the surface, disguised as stress, explained away as exhaustion. He worked long hours at the company he had inherited from his father, a construction firm with contracts worth millions, and he always claimed he carried the weight of hundreds of employees on his shoulders. I believed him. I carried the house, the bills, the endless cycle of sacrifice so he could carry the empire. I remembered 2017, when he nearly lost a major deal and spent nights pacing our living room, phone glued to his ear. I stayed up with him, brewing coffee at 2 a.m., massaging his temples, whispering that everything would be fine. I remembered 2019, when the economy crashed and he begged me to dip into the savings I had scraped together, teaching extra language classes in the evenings. "Just for a few months," he said. I handed it over without hesitation, watching the nest egg vanish because I believed we were a team. I remembered 2020, the year of the pandemic, when I juggled our son's online schooling while taking freelance work to keep food on the table, while he disappeared into endless emergency meetings that always seemed to end with him smelling of whiskey and smoke. I told myself it was stress, that men under pressure cracked in strange ways, that loyalty meant patience. My mother used to tell me, "Marriage is sacrifice, Filha. You choose it every day, even when it's hard." So I chose it, again and again, even when it meant burying my own needs, my own voice, my own suspicions. But that night, when he said the word divorce in front of our son, something inside me broke. He wasn't just walking away from me. He was using cruelty as a weapon, carving his decision into the heart of a child who still believed his parents were unbreakable. Our boy pushed back his chair, tears filling his eyes. "Dad, don't," he whispered. And the man who had once held him as a baby, who had promised to protect him from every monster under the bed, didn't flinch. He repeated it, cold as stone. "I want a divorce." I stood, my body trembling, my voice barely steady. "Go to your room," I told my son gently. "It's going to be okay." He obeyed, wiping his cheeks with the back of his hand, casting one last look at me that nearly split my heart in two. The door closed softly behind him, and I turned back to my husband. "Why like this?" I demanded, my voice raw. "Why in front of him?" His eyes were hard, his mouth twisted in a grimace that almost looked like satisfaction. "Because he needs to know," he said. "He needs to understand what kind of woman his mother really is." The accusation hit me harder than the divorce itself. He wasn't just leaving, he was setting fire to my name, planting seeds of poison in our son's mind. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he raised his hand, cutting me off. "Don't bother denying it. I'll make sure he knows everything. And when I'm finished, you won't have him, or this house, or a penny from me. You think you've sacrificed? You think you've carried me? You're nothing without what I've built." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the plates against the wall, to make the whole room echo with the truth I carried. The truth about him, about his company, about the kind of secrets that could burn his empire to the ground. Secrets he never thought I noticed, but I had. Because I was the one who balanced the books when he was too drunk, the one who answered emails when he was too busy at the club, the one who saw the contracts with inflated numbers, the bribes disguised as consulting fees, the offshore accounts linked to names that weren't his. He thought I was blind. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just the wife who cooked, who saved, who kept silent. But I had seen everything. And in that moment, as my body trembled and my son sobbed behind a closed door, I understood something that made my rage harden into resolve. He might destroy our marriage. He might wound our child. He might even poison the family against me. But I had the power to destroy everything he cared about most. The empire he worshipped. The reputation he wore like armor. The image he built brick by brick, while I bled myself dry to hold it up. And one day soon, he would learn that patience, when pushed too far, becomes a weapon sharper than any betrayal. The morning after he asked for the divorce, the apartment was heavy with silence. My son barely touched his breakfast, stirring his cereal until it dissolved into mush. His eyes avoided mine, but I could feel the weight of his questions pressing against me. Questions he was too afraid to ask. I wanted to reach across the table, to gather him in my arms, to tell him none of this was his fault. But every time I opened my mouth, my husband's words from the night before echoed in my skull. He needs to understand what kind of woman his mother really is. Poison disguised as parenting. I carried that poison into every corner of my day. At work, when I tried to focus on the reports stacked on my desk, his voice taunted me. In the grocery store, when I picked out fruit for dinner, I imagined the whispers that would come once he spread his version of the truth. At night, when my son lay in bed pretending to sleep, I heard him cry quietly into his pillow. And I lay awake in the dark, my body trembling, knowing this wasn't just about betrayal, it was war. The irony is, I had sacrificed for this man long before the cracks ever showed. In 2014, the year we married, I left a promising position at a language school to help him expand his company's office. I managed paperwork, balanced schedules, even handled payroll when the secretary quit without notice. I didn't complain when I was paid nothing for it. "We're building a future together," he said, and I believed him. In 2016, when the company won its first big government contract, he celebrated by buying a new car. I celebrated by teaching evening classes to cover the new insurance bills. In 2018, when our son needed therapy after struggling in school, I cut corners everywhere. Selling jewelry my grandmother left me, working weekends to pay for sessions. He told me I worried too much, that kids were resilient. I saw resilience in my boy's eyes every time he pushed through frustration, and I refused to let him fall. I carried that alone, while my husband basked in boardrooms and late-night dinners where business blurred with pleasure. By 2020, when the pandemic slammed us, I was sewing masks until my fingers bled, teaching online classes between cooking and cleaning, juggling my son's assignments while my husband locked himself in the office with urgent calls. I thought he was saving the company. Later, I would discover he was saving himself, padding secret accounts while I drained our savings to pay suppliers and salaries. The manipulations weren't sudden. They were steady, subtle, each one tightening the noose around my neck. He had a way of twisting reality, of making me feel guilty for questioning him. When I asked about the missing money in 2019, he smiled and kissed my forehead. "You don't need to worry about these things. Let me be the man." When I confronted him about nights he didn't come home, he sighed, tired, and said, "You always think the worst of me? No wonder I feel alone." And I, desperate to keep the peace, swallowed my doubts and carried his excuses like stones in my chest. But what broke me wasn't the lies. It was how easily he used our son as a weapon. A child should never be the battlefield. And yet he planted seeds in our boy's heart, hoping they would grow into doubt. I saw it in the way my son glanced at me now, hesitation flickering in his eyes, as if he wondered whether his father's words were true. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he whispered, "Mom, Dad said you might not love him anymore. Is that why he wants to leave?" My chest shattered at the innocence in his voice. I cupped his face, my hands trembling. "Listen to me," I said firmly. "What happens between your father and me has nothing to do with love for you. I will never stop loving you. You are my everything." He nodded, but I could see the confusion lingering, the seed already buried. Lying awake after that, I realized the cruelty of it. My husband wasn't just divorcing me, he was trying to erase me, to rewrite the story so that I was the villain, the failure, the reason for his betrayal. But what he didn't understand was that I held truths far heavier than his lies. Truths about his company, about the deals signed with names that didn't exist, about the money funneled to accounts in places he swore he'd never been. I had seen the invoices, the mismatched numbers, the contracts that smelled of bribes. I had stayed quiet out of loyalty, out of fear, out of love. Now silence was no longer loyalty. Silence was surrender. And I refused to surrender. I didn't know when or how, but deep inside I knew this. The same patience that carried me through years of sacrifice would soon become my weapon. And one day, when he least expected it, the truth I carried would be enough to bring down not just our marriage, but the empire he had built on lies. 2 weeks after he dropped the word divorce like a bomb in our dining room, the mask he wore to the world began to crack. It started small, an anxious tap of his fingers on the steering wheel, late-night pacing in the hallway, calls he tried to take outside, but that drifted back through the thin apartment walls anyway. He was slipping. One evening, I caught fragments of a conversation as I washed dishes. His voice was tight, low, urgent. "We can't let the auditors see that contract. Delay the inspection. I'll handle her." The word "her" made my skin crawl. Was he talking about me? I turned off the tap, straining to hear, but the conversation ended abruptly. He re-entered the kitchen seconds later, forcing a smile, his tone casual. "We should start thinking about selling this place, don't you think? It's too small anyway." Selling. Always thinking in terms of assets, in terms of what could be liquidated, hidden, erased. And yet he spoke as if my voice had no weight, as if I were already gone. But I wasn't gone. I was watching, listening. And I had kept everything. Photocopies of suspicious invoices, screenshots of bank transfers that didn't match our statements, emails he thought I'd deleted, but I saved in a folder buried under a different name. He believed me naive, uneducated in his world of contracts and bids. He never knew I learned to read his business the way a doctor reads symptoms. And the diagnosis was corruption. The more pressure mounted at his company, the more vicious he became at home. He snapped at our son for small mistakes, spilling juice, forgetting homework. He raised his voice at me for asking simple questions. "What time will you be back? Did you already pay the water bill?" Questions became accusations in his twisted logic. "You're spying on me. You're trying to trap me." But manipulation always has a pattern, and I began to see it clearly. He wanted me unstable, doubting myself, carrying the guilt of his sins so that when the storm hit, I'd be too broken to fight. One night, as rain hammered the windows, he cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath heavy with whiskey. "You know," he said, his voice slurred but sharp, "if you go around telling stories about me, you'll regret it. Nobody will believe you. They'll believe me, the man who built something from nothing, the man who provides jobs. You? You're just a wife with complaints." I stared at him, my hands gripping the counter. A year ago, those words might have crushed me. Now, they only hardened me. "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe I'm the wife who knows where the bodies are buried." The words startled him. For a moment, his bravado slipped, his face pale, his lips tightening. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow. I had touched the nerve he thought I'd never find. Days later, I received an unexpected call. It was his younger brother, Daniel, who managed part of the accounts at the firm. His tone was hushed, nervous. "Listen," he said, "I don't know what's happening between you two, but things aren't right at the company. There are gaps in the books, Money missing. If this goes public, he cut himself off, sighing. Just be careful. He's not the man he used to be. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Confirmation. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't inventing stories to make sense of betrayal. The empire he loved more than his family was rotting from the inside, and I held the match that could burn it down completely. That weekend, he tried a different tactic. He brought flowers home, cheap ones from a gas station, but his smile was rehearsed. "Let's not fight in front of our son," he said. "Let's keep things civil." Civil. As if we were negotiating property lines, not a life torn apart. I accepted the flowers without a word, placing them in a vase already chipped at the rim. They wilted in 2 days, their petals falling silently onto the table. I began to sense what was coming. He thought divorce was simple, that he could walk away with everything, smear my name, keep the empire safe, but the walls were closing in, and he knew I was the only person who could expose the cracks before they caved in completely, and it terrified him. The shift in his strategy was subtle at first, like a shadow moving across a room so slowly you hardly notice it. But I noticed. He stopped arguing with me directly and started whispering to our son instead. It was always in moments when he thought I wasn't listening, when they were in the car together, when he tucked him into bed, when they watched television on the couch. One night, as I passed by the hallway, I caught his voice, low and measured. "You know, your mom doesn't really understand how hard I work for us. She doesn't see how much pressure I'm under. She thinks I'm the bad guy." My son didn't answer, but I could feel the confusion in the silence that followed. I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. The betrayal of my marriage was one thing, but turning my child into a pawn? That was unforgivable. The next morning, I found a drawing on the kitchen table. My son had sketched a house split in half, a stick figure mother on one side, father on the other, and himself standing small in the middle. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside my notebook, next to the budgets and sacrifices of years past. Another record of what this man was breaking. He escalated quickly. A week later, during dinner, he looked at our son and said, "One day you'll understand why I had to leave. Some people only pretend to care about family." His eyes slid to me like a knife across the table. I kept my voice steady. "Eat your food," I told our boy softly, but the damage was already done. I saw doubt flicker in his eyes, the seed his father had planted beginning to sprout. I realized then that this wasn't just about surviving the end of a marriage. It was about protecting my son's heart, his future, his ability to know truth from lies. And that meant I couldn't stay silent anymore. One night I sat with him in his room, the glow of his desk lamp soft against the walls. "Listen to me," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Grown-ups make mistakes, big ones. But you need to know something. None of this is your fault. And no matter what anyone says, I will never stop fighting for you." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet. "But Dad says—" I cut him off gently, placing my finger on his lips. "Sometimes even dads say things that aren't true. What matters is what you see, what you know in your heart." His arms wrapped around me then, tight and desperate, as if he feared I might disappear. And in that embrace, I felt both my deepest wound and my greatest strength. Meanwhile, his company troubles were boiling over. I overheard him shouting on the phone late at night, words like auditors, breach, investigation. The walls of his empire were crumbling, and he was desperate to keep me silent. One evening he cornered me in the kitchen, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. "If you tell anyone what you know, you'll destroy everything. Our son's future, my career, this family's name. Do you want to be responsible for that?" The irony nearly made me laugh. Responsible? After everything, he dared to pin responsibility on me? My silence had already cost me years. Cost me my dignity. Cost my son his innocence. His manipulation no longer worked. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "The only one destroying this family is you." For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Fear. He realized then that I was no longer the woman who swallowed her doubts, who cut corners quietly, who carried his sins like they were mine. He realized I was the woman who had proof, who had endured enough, who could end the empire he worshipped. And that fear made him dangerous. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of day that looked ordinary on the surface but carried the weight of everything boiling underneath. I was sitting at the table with my son, helping him with his math homework. The apartment was quiet except for the scratching of his pencil. Then came the sound. 3 frantic knocks at the door. Not the confident rhythm I knew so well, but something desperate, uneven. When I opened it, the sight nearly stopped my heart. My husband, the man who had stood so tall in boardrooms, who had announced our divorce like a king delivering a decree, was on his knees. On his knees, in the dim hallway light, his eyes wild, his hair disheveled, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Please," he whispered. His voice cracked. "Please don't do this to me." My son looked up from the table, his face pale with confusion. "Dad?" His small voice trembled, unsure if this was the same father who had once spoken with such certainty, who now looked broken, stripped of dignity. I closed the door halfway, shielding our boy from the scene, and stepped into the hallway. "What are you doing?" I hissed. My voice was low, sharp, but my body shook. I had never seen him like this. Not in defeat, not begging. "They're closing in," he muttered, his voice frantic. "The auditors, the contracts, they'll find everything. And you—" His eyes filled with panic. "You have the documents, the copies. If you talk, I lose everything. The company, the houses, the reputation. Please don't. I'll do anything. Just don't." I felt the cold walls of the corridor pressing against me. For years, he had stood over me, towering, dictating, controlling. Now he was on his knees, begging for mercy he had never shown me. The reversal was dizzying. "You wanted a divorce," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough. "You humiliated me in front of our son. You turned him against me. And now you want me to protect you?" His hands reached for mine, desperate, clawing at the air. "I was wrong. I was stupid. I don't care about the divorce anymore. I don't care about anything. I just need you to stay quiet. Please, for our son. For us." The mention of our son ignited a fury inside me. "Don't you dare use him!" I spat. "Not again. Not as a shield. You broke him the moment you spoke those words in front of him. Don't pretend this is about family. This is about your empire." He collapsed further, his forehead nearly touching the floor. "Yes, it's about the company, but it's also about survival. They'll come for me, for us. You think you can protect yourself if I fall? They'll drag you in too. Please, I'm begging you, don't say anything." For a moment I almost pitied him, the man who once looked invincible, reduced to trembling in a hallway. But pity was a luxury he had burned with every betrayal. I remembered every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment he twisted the truth until I doubted myself. I remembered my son's drawing of the house split in 2. I remembered the threats, the manipulation, the cruelty. I crouched down so my face was level with his. My voice was steady, cold. "You should have thought about survival before you built your empire on lies. You should have thought about survival when you betrayed your family. You should have thought about survival when you taught our son that cruelty was strength." His tears fell onto the floor, darkening the tile. He whispered again, "Please." But for the first time in years, I didn't bend. I didn't comfort. I didn't silence myself. I stood, pulling the door open just enough to step back inside. My son was watching from the table, wide-eyed, his homework forgotten. I closed the door firmly, leaving his father in the hallway, still on his knees. That night, as I tucked my boy into bed, he whispered, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I kissed his forehead, tears burning my eyes. "Yes," I said, "because we have the truth, and the truth is stronger than any lie." For the first time, I believed it. The days after he knelt at my door carried a strange electricity in the air, as if every sound, every shadow was charged with tension. He didn't come back into the apartment. Not that night, not the next. But his presence clung to the walls like smoke. My son asked about him constantly. "Is Dad coming home?" And each time I forced my voice steady, telling him, Not now. He needs time. Inside, though, I knew the truth. It wasn't time he needed. It was control, and he had lost it. By Thursday, the silence broke. He showed up at the school gates, waiting for our son as classes ended. I was there too, because I no longer trusted him alone. When my boy spotted me, relief flooded his face. His father's smile froze mid-step. He hadn't expected me. We walked home together, the three of us, a strange triangle. My son chattered nervously about his science project, his small voice filling the gaps. I noticed how carefully his father looked at him, like he was trying to rehearse a role, to present himself as the man our boy still wanted him to be. But every time his eyes flicked to mine, the mask cracked. He was afraid, not of losing me, not of losing the marriage, but of losing the silence I had carried for him all those years. That night, he sent me a message. "We need to talk." Alone. I didn't reply, but I didn't sleep either. I lay awake, listening to my son breathe softly in the next room, and replayed the years like an old film reel. The contracts that passed across our dining table, the invoices with numbers that didn't add up, the bribes disguised as consulting fees. I thought of 2018 when I first saw an email from a supplier addressed to a false company name, a shell account. I remembered how he explained it away, kissing my forehead. Don't worry about things you don't understand. But I did understand. I always did. Now those fragments weren't just suspicions. They were leverage. Power I never wanted, but power nonetheless. And he knew it. That's why he had knelt, why he was begging, why he was trying to pull our son closer. He wasn't fighting for family. He was fighting for his empire. The next day, I found an envelope slipped under our door. Inside was a letter in his handwriting. "I'll give you everything you want. The apartment, the car, support for our son. Just don't talk. Don't ruin me." His desperation was written in every rushed line, every word underlined twice. For years, I had prayed for him to recognize my sacrifices. For years, I had begged silently for acknowledgement, for respect, for honesty. And now, the first time he offered anything, it was not love. It was bribery. Payment for silence. I placed the letter inside my notebook, alongside the budgets, the invoices, the drawing my son made of our broken home. Proof, not just of what he had done, but of who he had become. That evening, I looked at my son as he worked on his homework, his small fingers gripping the pencil tightly. I thought about the future he deserved, one built on truth, not lies. And I realized the choice in front of me wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing his father. It was about survival. Ours, not his. I whispered to myself, so low only the walls could hear. Patience is not a blindfold anymore. It's a blade, and I will use it. The question was how and when. The pressure came like waves crashing from every direction. He had realized begging wasn't enough, so he switched strategies again, no longer on his knees at my door, but behind other people's voices, trying to corner me through them. It started with his sister. She called one Saturday morning, her tone drenched in honey. "He told me you two are having difficulties. Look, I know he's not perfect, but you have to think about the bigger picture. The company feeds dozens of families. If you talk about things that don't concern you, you'll ruin lives. Don't drag everyone down with you." Her words stung because they echoed his, the same attempt to make me the villain, to frame my silence as duty. I listened, letting her pour out her rehearsed speech. And when she paused for breath, I said only, "You should ask him why he's so afraid." Then I hung up. Days later, his mother called. Her voice was softer, more fragile. "He made mistakes, Filha, but men do that. Don't destroy him over mistakes. Think of your boy. He needs a father. Please don't shame the family." I closed my eyes, my hand shaking on the receiver. Shame. That word had haunted me since childhood, drilled into me as something to be avoided at any cost. But shame had already moved into our house long before I ever spoke. Shame lived in the lies he planted, in the bribes disguised, in the whispers he fed our son. Even some of his employees reached out. A man named Sergio, who had worked in the firm's accounts for years, pulled me aside outside the clinic where I worked. He says you're angry, but don't take it out on us. If the company collapses, we lose everything. Please, sign whatever papers he wants and let it go. His eyes carried exhaustion, fear of unemployment. And for a brief moment, guilt pierced me. But then I remembered the bank transfers, the offshore accounts, the way he had stolen from the very salaries he claimed to protect. He wasn't their savior. He was their thief. The manipulation was coordinated, relentless. Every call, every visit, every whisper carried the same message. Stay silent. Protect him. Sacrifice yourself one last time. But I had changed. One night, he showed up again at the apartment, not kneeling this time, but dressed sharply, his tie loosened, his cologne heavy. He leaned against the doorframe as if nothing had happened. "We need to be adults about this," he said smoothly. "Think of the boy. Think of the family. If you keep your mouth shut, I'll make sure you and our son live comfortably. I'll transfer assets. I'll cover everything. You'll never have to worry again." I looked at him for a long moment, and I realized something chilling. He no longer saw me as a wife, or even an enemy. He saw me as a liability to be negotiated, a risk to be contained. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't trying to fix the damage. He was buying silence. "You still don't get it," I told him quietly. "I don't want your money. I want my son to know the truth. I want to stop carrying your lies." His mask cracked then, his voice sharpening. "If you do this, you'll destroy me." I met his eyes, steady. "No, you destroyed yourself. I'm just done covering it up." He stared at me, breathing hard, his jaw clenching. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but instead, he turned on his heel and stormed away. The door slammed, rattling the frame. That night, I lay awake beside my son's soft breathing and realized the war was no longer just inside our home. It had spilled into the family, the company, the community, and all of them were watching me, waiting to see if I would keep quiet or strike. I knew then that silence was no longer survival. It was complicity, and I would not be complicit anymore. The decision to gather everything I knew didn't come in a sudden burst of courage. It came quietly, like a tide rising inch by inch until you realize the shore you stood on is already gone. I began in the most ordinary way, opening the drawer where I kept my old notebooks. There they were, years of sacrifices written in careful lines, budgets scratched with pencil, notes about loans, payments, receipts, the evidence of my life, but tucked inside, between pages of grocery lists and school fees, I had hidden the pieces of his empire that never belonged to him. Photocopies of suspicious invoices, screenshots of inflated contracts, records of bribes dressed as consulting fees. For years, I had told myself I was paranoid, that a loyal wife didn't keep these things. But now, loyalty was the very chain he had used to keep me quiet. And I wasn't quiet anymore. At night, after my son fell asleep, I sat under the weak light of the desk lamp, organizing it all. I spread the papers across the table like a detective building a case. Each document was a memory. The night in 2018 when he swore the numbers were fine, the morning in 2020 when I found an email with a shell company's name, the transfer receipts to accounts abroad that matched the exact weeks he claimed the business was struggling. The story was clear now, and it wasn't just betrayal of a wife, it was betrayal of the law. But secrets like this are dangerous. And the more I pieced them together, the more I felt eyes on me, even in empty rooms. A car idling too long near the corner of our street. A phone call that went silent when I answered. My husband wasn't stupid. He knew I was the only one who could sink him, and I suspected he had people watching. Meanwhile, the pressure from the family grew sharper. One aunt cornered me after church, her voice low but her words cutting. "You're going to ruin us all. Do you want your mother's name dragged through the mud? Keep the peace, Filha. Don't shame us." Shame. Always shame. It had been their favorite weapon since childhood. But shame was just another word for silence, and I was done with silence. One evening, my son found me surrounded by papers at the table. His eyes widened, fear flickering in them. "Mom, Are you going to send Dad to jail? The question sliced through me. He was only 11. He shouldn't have known those words. Shouldn't have had to carry that fear. I pulled him close, holding him against my chest. Listen to me, I said softly. I don't know what will happen to Dad, but I know this. We're going to be safe, and we're going to live in truth. That's the only way forward. He didn't fully understand, but he nodded, trusting me in the way children do, with blind faith that burned my throat with guilt and resolve at once. By the end of that week, I had 3 envelopes ready, each one thick with copies of documents, photographs, timelines. One addressed to a lawyer, another to an investigative journalist I had quietly contacted, and one kept hidden in my mother's house, just in case. Insurance. If anything happened to me, the truth wouldn't die. The final piece came unexpectedly. Daniel, his younger brother, called again. His voice was strained, almost broken. "You're right," he said. "The company is drowning in lies. I tried to fix it, but he wouldn't listen. If this explodes, we'll all be dragged down. I don't blame you anymore. Do what you need to do." His words weren't absolution, but they were confirmation. Even inside his family, the truth was starting to leak through the cracks. That night, as I sealed the envelopes, I realized the storm was no longer approaching. It was here. The only choice left was whether I would let it sweep me under or stand tall in the rain. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to stand. The twist came on a Monday morning, wrapped in the ordinary. I was making coffee when the knock rattled the door. Sharp, official, nothing like his frantic pounding weeks before. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men in dark suits, badges clipped to their belts. My stomach tightened. They introduced themselves as investigators from the Federal Revenue Office. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about your husband's company," one of them said, his tone polite but firm. My husband wasn't even home. He had left early, muttering about meetings. The timing felt too precise to be coincidence. They knew exactly when to come. I let them in, my hands trembling as I set mugs of coffee on the table. My son was at school, thank God. The investigators laid out a folder filled with documents, contracts, financial statements, even photographs of meetings my husband thought were hidden. "We believe there have been irregularities," the older one said carefully. "But what we need is context. You were married to him for over a decade. You might know things no one else does." For a moment, fear locked my throat. If I spoke, I wasn't just exposing him. I was stepping into a fire that could burn me too. But then I remembered the night he used our son as a weapon. The nights he drained our savings. The morning I found that drawing of a broken home. I opened my drawer and slid one of my envelopes across the table. "I think you'll find this useful," I said. The younger investigator's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents I had spent months hiding. He looked at me with something close to respect. "You realize this could change everything," he said. When they left, the apartment felt different. Lighter, though still trembling under the storm. I sat alone, staring at the empty coffee mugs, knowing there was no turning back now. That evening, my husband burst through the door, his face pale, his tie loosened, his eyes wild. "What did you do?" he shouted. He slammed his fist against the table, rattling the vase where dead flowers still stood. "They came to me. They know too much. You talked, didn't you?" I stayed seated, my hands steady on my lap. "I didn't lie," I said. "I just stopped protecting you." His rage cracked into desperation. He grabbed a chair, nearly knocking it over, his voice breaking. "Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed me. You've destroyed our son's future." I stood then, meeting his eyes without flinching. "No, you destroyed yourself. I'm protecting our son by making sure he doesn't grow up thinking lies are strength." For the first time, he had no words. His mouth opened, then closed, his chest heaving like a man drowning. He stumbled backward, collapsing into the chair, his face buried in his hands. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not the giant who commanded boardrooms, not the tyrant who tried to rewrite our lives, but a man who had finally been cornered by his own shadows. Later that night, after he stormed out again, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo of him in an office with another woman, not my cousin this time, but a name I didn't know, shaking hands over documents that looked suspiciously like contracts. The caption read, "You're not the only one who knows." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about me versus him anymore. The net around him was wider, darker, and far more dangerous than I had imagined. The unexpected twist was clear. His empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. And now I wasn't the only one holding pieces of the truth. The collapse came faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, newspapers carried headlines about financial fraud, shell companies, inflated contracts. His name was there, bold and unavoidable. A man once praised for building an empire, now exposed for building a house of cards. The phone rang constantly. Journalists, creditors, even distant relatives desperate to know if the rumors were true. I didn't answer. I had already said what I needed to say. The day they came to arrest him, my son was at school. I watched from the window as they led him into the car. His wrists bound in silver, his head bowed, his tie askew. Neighbors whispered from doorways, some gasping, others shaking their heads. And for the first time, I didn't feel shame. I felt release. That night, my son sat at the kitchen table, his homework spread before him, but his pencil unmoving. "Is Dad a bad man?" he asked finally, his voice small, trembling. My heart clenched. I pulled the chair beside him, wrapped my arms around him, and whispered, "Dad made bad choices. That doesn't make you bad. You are not his mistakes." He leaned into me, his tears wetting my shirt. In that moment, I knew the truth mattered more than protection, because lies don't shield children. They poison them. Days turned into weeks. Court hearings, depositions, endless paperwork. I walked through it all with my head high, not because it didn't hurt, but because the weight was finally honest. No more pretending, no more silence, no more carrying his sins as if they were mine. Each page I signed, each question I answered, was a stone lifted from my chest. One afternoon, I went back to my mother's house. The kitchen smelled of beans simmering on the stove, the same comfort I'd known since childhood. She held my face in her hands, her eyes lined with sorrow but burning with pride. "You survived," she said simply, and I realized she was right. Survival wasn't just breathing through betrayal. Survival was choosing truth, even when it shattered everything familiar. I returned home that evening and opened my notebook, the same one where I had tracked budgets, sacrifices, debts. I flipped past the pages stained with tears, past the drawings of a broken house. On a blank page, I wrote one word at the top, future. Underneath, I listed small things: a trip with my son to the beach, a new course at the community center, even a dog, something we had both wanted but had always been told not practical. For the first time, the numbers weren't about survival. They were about living. The apartment was quiet as the sun dipped low, painting the walls gold. I sat by the window, my son beside me, his head resting on my shoulder. Outside, the city buzzed, indifferent to my story. But inside, I felt something shift. The silence no longer suffocated me. It protected me. It was mine. I whispered into the fading light, more to myself than to anyone else. Patience is not a blindfold. It's a torch. And I carried it through the fire. And for the first time in years, I believed I wasn't broken. I was free.